The thunder of jets in an open sky, a streak of gray, and a cheerful...
You think you knew Rocky and Bullwinkle? Nah, fam. Everyone remembers this cartoon as just some goofy moose and squirrel getting into wacky adventures with Boris and Natasha, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. There's one episode that's been buried for 45 years, and when I tell you why, you're gonna lose your absolute mind. The episode was called Stokey the Bear, and it aired exactly once in 1962 before disappearing forever. Not delayed, not edited, not moved to late night. Gone. Vanished. And here's the thing that'll blow your brain. It wasn't because of violence or inappropriate content like you'd think. No cap. The real reason this episode got nuked is so much darker and more twisted than anything you could imagine. We're talking government agencies threatening lawsuits, voice actors getting blacklisted, and a corporate conspiracy that goes all the way to the top of the entertainment industry. And the final bombshell? The real reason they buried this episode has nothing to do with what you see on screen, and everything to do with what was happening behind the scenes. By the time I'm done breaking this down, you'll never look at Saturday morning cartoons the same way again. Trust me on this one. What they didn't want you to see back then is exactly what they're still trying to hide today, when Smokey Bear's lawyers got involved. So here's how this whole mess started, and straight up, it's way more insane than you think. The episode opens with what seems like just another typical Rocky and Bullwinkle parody. They introduce this character called Stokey the Bear, who's supposed to be teaching forest fire safety. Innocent enough, right? Wrong. But here's where it gets twisted. Within 24 hours of the episode airing, the U.S. Forest Service went absolutely nuclear. We're talking emergency meetings, legal teams working overtime, and threats that would make your head spin. See, Smokey Bear isn't just some cute mascot. He's legally protected intellectual property owned by the federal government, and they do not mess around when it comes to protecting that trademark. The Forest Service fired off cease and desist letters so fast, it made the Postal Service look slow. They claimed the parody was damaging to their fire prevention campaigns and demanded not just that the episode never air again, but that all copies be destroyed. And here's the kicker. They had the legal power to do it. Under the Smokey Bear Act of 1952, unauthorized use of Smokey's likeness is literally a federal crime. We're talking fines up to $250,000 and potential jail time. But wait, it gets even crazier. The Forest Service didn't just target J. Ward Productions. They went after the network, the sponsors, even the local TV stations. They threatened to pull federal advertising contracts worth millions of dollars. TV executives were getting calls from Washington, D.C. at 2 a.m. demanding explanations. And you know what the most twisted part is? Other shows had parodied Smokey before and gotten away with just a warning. So why did Rocky and Bullwinkle get the nuclear treatment? Why was this the episode that crossed the line? But that's nothing compared to what the voice actors were hiding during those recording sessions. The secret recording sessions. They don't want you to know about, all right? So you think the Forest Service going ballistic was bad? Wait until you hear what was happening inside the actual recording studio, because this is where things get absolutely unhinged. June Foray, the voice of Rocky, was known for being a total professional, never caused drama, always showed up prepared. But during the Stokey sessions, she was asking questions that made everyone uncomfortable. She kept pushing back on certain lines, asking why they were really making fun of fire safety when California was literally dealing with one of its worst fire seasons on record. And here's the thing that'll fry your brain. She was right to be worried, but here's where it gets darker. Bill Scott, who voiced Bullwinkle, was supposedly getting pressure from someone outside the studio. We're talking mysterious phone calls during breaks, hushed conversations in the hallway, and him completely changing his delivery on certain jokes mid-session. The other voice actors noticed he was sweating through lines that should have been easy for him. Paul Frees, the narrator, actually walked out of one session, just straight up left. When the director asked why, he said he wasn't comfortable with where this was heading. Nobody talks about this, but there are people who were there who remember it happening. And get this, Freeze came back the next day like nothing happened, but his whole energy was different, subdued, like someone had gotten to him. The sound engineers later said the tension in that booth was unlike anything they had experienced. These were seasoned professionals who'd been doing cartoon voices for years, and suddenly they're acting like they're recording state secrets instead of a kid's show. Why were veteran voice actors suddenly terrified of a cartoon bear parody? What exactly were they being pressured to say or not say? But that's child's play compared to the real reason it disappeared. The Cold War connection. Nobody talks about. Okay, so you think government trademark lawyers and panicked voice actors were wild? Buckle up, because we're about to dive into some next-level conspiracy territory that will absolutely melt your brain. But here's where it gets absolutely insane. The Stokey the Bear episode wasn't just making fun of fire safety, it was dropping environmental commentary that hit way too close to home during the height of the Cold War. We're talking 1962, right in the middle of nuclear testing, atomic bomb fears, and the government trying to convince everyone that radiation was totally fine and dandy. The episode had jokes about forests being safer from fires than from other things. And if you know anything about what was happening in Nevada and New Mexico at the time, you know exactly what they were really talking about. Underground nuclear tests were literally setting parts of the desert on fire, and the government was desperately trying to keep that quiet. J. Ward Productions had a history of sneaking political commentary past the censors, but this time they went too far. The script included lines about invisible dangers that were way more threatening than regular fires. Sound familiar? Yeah, they were basically calling out radiation contamination while dressed up as a kid's cartoon about forest safety. Here's what'll really cook your noodle. The Forest Service wasn't just protecting Smokey Bear's image. They were working directly with the Atomic Energy Commission to make sure nothing interfered with public confidence in nuclear testing programs. And guess what department oversaw both forest management and nuclear test site cleanup? Yep, same bureaucrats, same meetings, same cover-up mentality. The episode was basically exposing government hypocrisy in real time, and they knew it. While they're telling kids to prevent forest fires, they're literally creating radioactive fires underground and lying about it. But wait, it gets even more twisted. Rocky and Bullwinkle had been getting away with Cold War satire for years, with Boris and Natasha, right? The government actually loved that because it made the Soviets look like bumbling idiots. But when the show turned that same satirical lens on American nuclear policy, game over. There are people who worked at the network who remember getting calls from Washington that weren't from the Forest Service. These were serious government officials asking pointed questions about who wrote the script, who approved it, and whether the writers had any communist sympathies. This was McCarthyism in full swing, and suddenly a cartoon moose was being treated like a national security threat. The most insane part? J. Ward himself later admitted in a private interview that never got published that they knew they were pushing boundaries. He said they deliberately loaded the episode with double meanings because they figured most adults wouldn't catch the references. But someone in Washington definitely caught them, and they did not think it was funny. Environmental activists in the 1960s started asking uncomfortable questions about nuclear testing's impact on forests and wildlife. The last thing the government needed was a popular kids' show making those same connections for millions of families every Saturday morning. But even that isn't the most devastating part. The million-dollar cover-up that lasted decades. But here's where it gets absolutely nuclear, and I mean that literally. Everything I just told you about Cold War politics and government pressure, that was just the setup for the real conspiracy that'll make your jaw hit the floor. The truth is, this wasn't about copyright laws or political satire or even nuclear testing cover-ups. This was about money, serious money, the kind of money that makes networks cancel entire shows and pretend episodes never existed. General Mills was Rocky and Bullwinkle's primary sponsor, pumping millions into the show through cereal commercials. But here's what nobody talks about. General Mills also had massive contracts with the U.S. government to supply military rations and had been quietly investing in timber companies throughout the Pacific Northwest. When Stokey the Bear started making jokes about corporate responsibility and environmental damage, it wasn't just hitting government nerves. But here's where it gets absolutely devastating. The episode included a subplot where Stokey discovers that the real fire hazard isn't campers or lightning, it's industrial logging practices that leave forests like tinderboxes. They had animated sequences showing clear-cut hillsides and logging equipment abandoned in dry brush. This wasn't subtle environmental commentary anymore. This was a direct attack on an entire industry. Within hours of the episode airing, General Mills executives were getting calls from their timber industry partners, threatening to pull out of joint ventures worth tens of millions of dollars. We're talking about companies that controlled huge chunks of America's lumber supply, suddenly saying they wouldn't do business with anyone associated with anti-industry propaganda. The network executives found themselves caught between their biggest advertiser and the most powerful industry lobby in the country. General Mills gave them an ultimatum: kill the episode permanently and never speak of it again, or lose their sponsorship immediately. And here's the part that'll blow your mind. They chose the money, but it gets worse. The timber companies didn't just want the episode buried, they wanted to make sure something like this never happened again. So they started quietly buying shares in animation studios, funding industry-friendly content, and creating what we'd now call astroturfing campaigns to promote responsible forestry in children's programming. J. Ward Productions never got another major sponsor deal after this. Coincidence? Not a chance. They'd been blacklisted by an entire network of corporate interests who made sure everyone in Hollywood knew what happened when you bite the hand that feeds the advertising revenue. The episode disappeared because it threatened a financial ecosystem worth hundreds of millions of dollars. This wasn't about protecting Smokey Bear or national security. This was about protecting profit margins, and they were willing to bury an entire piece of American pop culture to do it. The real conspiracy? They're still doing it today. So there you have it, fam. What started as a simple cartoon parody turned into a massive cover-up involving government agencies, corporate blackmail, and millions of dollars in hush money. Makes you wonder what other innocent shows are hiding dark secrets, doesn't it? If this absolutely destroyed your worldview, smash that subscribe button, because trust me, we're just getting started. Until next time, remember, they don't want you asking these questions.